But you are in Los Angeles, Nick. And the reason you're on the West Coast for over a week is because of a lot of road games. It is a trip out there. UCLA, then Pepperdine, then USC. But this first weekend, UCLA, it started the same way as the previous week, where through 2 games, you'd already lost the series. This time, though, there was no salvaging it on Sunday, as it was a sweep by the Bruins, and Nebraska falls to 1-5 in the Big Ten Conference. Yes, it's to all of the new teams so far, but I had seen the stat posted that that's the worst start for the program since the late 90s, when they had an 0-8 start, I believe 1997, and 0-8 start in the first year of the Big 12 Conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and it's a very familiar kind of reoccurring theme right now for the team. Is they could get a lead early, and then whether it was Washington last week or this weekend UCLA, there'll be a crooked number put up, a punch back from whoever that team is, and then Nebraska's still searching for their own response. And when we've seen Nebraska have success this season, you'll see them typically get out early, and then whether we're talking about a Wichita State team or even Vanderbilt, when you go back to that second game of the season where Nebraska gets out to a good lead, then Vanderbilt comes right back in the bottom of the first. But then Nebraska had some answers in middle of the game offensively, and then they were able to bookend that game with some offense too. That's what's missing right now with Nebraska in this weekend, and in really that Washington game, other than Sunday, is you're not finding that offense in, say, the 5th or the 6th inning, or even that insurance in the 8th or 9th when it comes to these losses. And I know that's a source of frustration, because in conference play, you're going to, regardless of your start, a team is going to hit you back. So you've got to be the team that has the answer. And just in the batter's box alone right now, Nebraska unfortunately hasn't had that answer. And I think that is truly the source of frustration, because we were having this conversation last night, and I think you can look at a lot of minuscule things. And I think what maybe is getting too much of the conversation is the absence of Mason McConaughey. And that's not to say that that's not significant, because it is. Right. Mason McConaughey, what he means on the mound, but also as one of the veteran guys, one of the great guys on this team. There's no question it's a loss. But Nebraska's also not losing games 11-9. If they're losing games where they're putting up a lot of offense, then you can start to look at, okay, well, the staff, what's the staff doing right now? And is the pitching staff up to snuff? Are they just, because they're one significant arm down, is it just not in the cards? Well, they're not losing games like that. They're, Big Ten play right now, they're putting up just over 3 runs per game, which is just not going to cut it. So you've seen good performances out of Will Walsh. I thought even to start the game yesterday, before it went a little bit sideways, but at least he was pacing well. Ty Horn was I thought, giving you the kind of start, at least in the first couple innings, that you needed to try to establish yourself offensively. So I think there are little issues with the pitching staff for sure. There's no question, but I'd love to see if those issues are still there, if this staff on the mound is being supported in the batter's box. And quite frankly, that's not happening right now. And you're not going to, Will said it to me during the post game yesterday, you're not going to win games in conference play when you're scoring 3 runs. It's just not going to happen. And I will say this too, and this is not to, I don't know what Washington's going to be. I really don't. I think they could hit it decently. I still have questions about their pitching. This UCLA team, and shame on us, not you and I, but just everybody that was making preseason projections, that we did not take UCLA more serious. This was a team, their 2023 recruiting class was ranked number 1 in perfect game. There were a couple of guys that had their name very low in the MLB draft, but heard their name in the draft. That sophomore class now, that was that number 1 ranked recruiting class in 2023. And if you look at their starting lineup, with the exception of a guy or two on those 3 games, those are all sophomores. Chalowski, who is one of the best shortstops I've seen, he's a sophomore. Lavu, the first baseman, who actually struggled against Husker pitching, but he's got some big power numbers. They've got some arms. All those guys are from that class. This is a UCLA team that the Big Ten is going to have to deal with. This is a UCLA team that I actually walked away saying, yeah, Nebraska needs to figure things out in the batter's box, but they just got beat by a very good baseball team, one of the better ones that I think we're going to see in the Big Ten.
I know it's more complicated than this. Let me preface it with that. It's more complicated than this. The simple math is the loss of a starting pitcher is, that's one game a week. I know it's more complicated. It shuffles things around. You have someone pitching on a weekend that maybe would have otherwise been starting on a midweek game, and it shuffles other stuff. I get that. The simple math is it's one game on your weekend, not all three. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing right now is it's all three. And I think what you're talking about at the plate was really epitomized on Sunday. A 3-0 lead, so you got up. And then the rest of the game, only one guy got to second base.
Yeah.
So you're not even putting guys in scoring position, let alone scoring runs. So at that point, you're dependent on home runs. Like, you're dependent on, can somebody get one swing of the bat and get it done? And that's not happening at a high enough clip either. So when you start to add in that you're not getting base runners, you're not getting anyone into scoring position, and then you're not getting those hits, that's really tough to score runs. And at that point, it doesn't matter who you have on the hill, because you're just not going to win enough games when you don't get more than one guy to second base over the last 6 innings.
Well, and what was impressive about UCLA is a lot of the damage up until yesterday was done at the bottom of their lineup. I remember going into yesterday's game, and their 8-9 hitters that were in the starting lineup for yesterday's game, I compared to our 8-9 hitters as far as just their overall run production, what they drove in. It was 31-7. 31 RBIs between their 8-9 hitters that were starting yesterday. Now, of course, a context is important. Their 9-hole hitter yesterday in the Saturday game actually had 2 3-run homers in Salgado, and so that obviously inflates those numbers a little bit. But 31-7 is still pretty significant as far as what their 8-9 hitters had done in a situation where they could drive in runs compared to Nebraska. And this is the other thing that Will has talked about during this trip, and when we've talked before and after the game on the radio, and that is they're still trying to find those guys. They feel confident that they have them. They're still trying to find them. And then the other part is, where do you put them in the lineup? We've seen Dylan Carey sliding down, now sliding back up. Dylan Carey had a good weekend, and that is a very positive development. Tyler Stone, for the most part, had a good weekend. That's a positive development for this offense, but it's what you're doing to set the tone. Caden Brumball has been one of the more reliable bats in this lineup, but I start to look at the teams that are okay to the teams that are good to great, and you look at what are they doing down in the order? What are they doing 6 through 9? And this is why I walked away very impressed with UCLA. You are going to respect the ever-loving what out of their 1, 2, and 3 hitters, but when you have to deal with their 6 through 9 or their 7 through 9, because those guys not only have the ability to get on base, but they have the ability to leave the yard as well. That is a tough lineup to deal with. And everybody from UCLA, they were telling us, yeah, but our pitching. And that was maybe the most concerning thing, because I thought their arms were okay. It wasn't anything overwhelming. I think Nebraska's actually not only faced, but hit better pitching collectively. And that was the case with Washington too. I wasn't impressed with what they had on the mound. I think everything from what Nebraska expected to see from all of the guys that were going to throw the baseball, both against Washington and UCLA, I think they saw, but they were unable to get consistently solid contact, barrel on the baseball. And I think that's what Nebraska's searching for. I just think if they're able to get hot offensively, or maybe find those right combinations, this is where I think people who want to be critical of the pitching, people who even want to be critical of a little sloppier defense than what we've seen in years past under Will Bolt, I think a lot of those things are either masked, or I think just strictly go away. I think the central focus right now has to be, how do they correct what they're doing offensively, and how do they string hits together? How does those numbers with runners in scoring position elevate? Because all of those things, I know everyone's going to dwell on the strikeouts, and that's a part of it. Okay, they're striking out a lot, but when they elevate that number with runners in scoring position and start hitting at a better clip in those situations, that to me, I think, can really take over the entire team as far as the other issues that maybe people are dwelling on right now.
Does that feel to you, and you're in it a little bit more than I am, but does it feel to you that that's a little bit flipped from the last few years of Will Bolt, because to me it had seemed like you had guys that were going to put up runs. You had some just stud home run hitters a couple of years ago. Obviously, you saw the way the team was able to put up runs last year in spurts, but it always seemed like it came down to the pitching just wasn't able to hold on at the end. Now it seems like the pitching is doing enough. You're going to give up some runs, but there's just not enough of a gap that you're able to build with your offense. You're not able to stay in games because of the offense instead of it being the bullpen like you saw the last couple of years.
Yeah, I actually think that's fair, because I think what Nebraska had last year on the mound was maybe a little more surprising going into the season. Brett Sears, I don't know if everybody thought he was going to be a first-team All-Big Ten type of guy. Brett Sears was outstanding. Mason McConaughey all of a sudden came on the scene once he started locking down the weekend opportunities, especially on the Saturday spot. That was, I still think, maybe a bit of surprise. Maybe not to Rob Childress, because that's what he does. But right. I think to a lot of people that maybe even follow the program closely, you didn't necessarily count on that. And so, sure, you look at the offensive numbers a year ago compared to where they are now, and I mean, it is night and day. But yeah, I think going even back to certain years, this was funny because we were actually doing this. My first year doing Nebraska baseballs in 2016. And I remember we had a road trip, Ben and I did, out to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Nebraska got swept. And I remember it had just such a real ominous feel to it. And it felt like Nebraska had really struggled. And you were wondering, okay, how do they rebound from this one? And they ended up finishing second in the Big Ten that year. But I went back and I looked at what was their record going into it, and it was a lot better than what I anticipated. There was a lot of things you're talking about. The pitching wasn't nearly as solid, but they had some guys that could slug a little bit. And then I compared. There was a lot of conversation about 2022 compared to what I thought was a pretty rough year in 2018. And we were looking at numbers offensively, the batting average difference between what this team is doing right now in, struggling at the plate compared to what that 2018 team was doing. It blew my mind that 2018 team actually hit 281. So again, to your point, I think in some of those previous years' struggles, it has been the pitching. Now, I didn't look at the ERA in 2018, but I guarantee you it was probably well north of 5.5 or 6. Yeah. And, so to your point, okay, that's where maybe what was on the mound was a little bit more challenging than what you had at the plate. So that can be a good thing, though, Kaleb, because if this offense, because you know how cyclical it can be just within a season where you're as a team slumping. There's the part of you that if your glass is half full, you can hit your way out of it. And then there's the glass half empty that, well, this is just who they are. I still think that they can hit their way out of it. And as long as the pitching just holds the fort down for the time being, if that thing can pop, there's still some time. That runway's getting shorter. There's no question. We're a third of a way through the season right now. So it's not like, you got the entire year. But from that standpoint, if they can just get a little bit more consistent offensively, I think even with the loss of Mason McConaughey, there's been value, especially some young arms out of the bullpen. I've liked what I've seen from Will Walsh being able to set the tone. Even Ty Horn has given you some solid moments. Jackson was fine until he gives up the solo home run, and then it went a little bit sideways, but that doesn't happen until the fourth or fifth inning yesterday too. So, there's those things right now that you just say, all right, well, let's wait and see if this offense can get going. If you can look at 4 guys in the lineup, maybe 5, but 4 guys in the lineup consistently hitting the ball, that could be such a lift compared to 1 or even 2 guys that what you're kind of seeing right now.
5.7 was that ERA in 2018.
Yeah. It was a tough one. There were guys getting thrown to the wolves because they had injuries that year on the staff as well. But man, that was tough.
You compare that to this year's team with a current ERA of 5.08. So you're looking at almost a run difference already on earned runs compared to that 28 team. Nebraska sitting at 7-11 overall, 1-5 in the Big Ten Conference. That puts them at second to last in the league for the Big Ten standings. Oregon and UCLA out in front at 5-1 in the league. They've also got two of the best overall records, 17-4, 16-4. The best overall record, though, actually in the Big Ten Conference, a team that's won 8 of their last 10, it's 17-2 Purdue.
Yeah. How about that?
Up there right now, but a lot of Big Ten games to go. This is one where obviously you don't want to be 1-5 to start, but if you're looking at where you're at, just Big Ten, you're not looking at hosting a regional, you're not looking at these other things. You're looking at just where you are in the Big Ten. There's a lot of room to improve and a lot of opportunities to do so in the Big Ten Conference. Next up there will be USC this weekend. We'll preview that on Thursday. Between now and then, though, Huskers taking on Pepperdine, 5 o'clock Central, first pitch, both tomorrow and Wednesday. Nick, looking forward to listening to you guys on the Huskers Radio Network for all of that.
Get ready to see a lot of cool pre-game tweets with the Pacific Ocean out there just behind left field. One of the more beautiful ballparks out there in Malibu, but it's going to be challenging getting there because with the wildfires, we were told that there are going to be some interesting routes that we have to take to get clearance just to get into near campus. So that is going to be interesting. But yeah, one of the most beautiful ballparks that you're going to see in college baseball with the way it sets. And then game time for us will be 3 o'clock here Pacific time. So we'll be able to see that sun starting to set into it. It's going to be really neat.
Oh, beautiful. It's the Rose Bowl of college baseball.
Exactly.